Go for it, Jen. We'll make a start.
Okie dokie. So we'll make a start. So Peter's a long-standing member of the CE committee and has formerly edited the journal, The Social Educator. He's now a senior lecturer in humanities and social sciences with the Faculty of Education down at the University of Tasmania. So I hope you're warm enough today, Peter. It's certainly cold up here on the mainland, near Melbourne at least. And thank you for speaking to us today.
No trouble. Welcome everybody, and welcome to folk who are joining this presentation via recording as well, kind of asynchronously. I want to start by acknowledging with deep respect the traditional owners of the many lands that we're meeting on virtually today. Here in Tasmania, the Palawa people belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world. They cared and protected for country for thousands of years. They knew this land. They lived on the land and they died on these lands, and I honour them. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that didn't make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community that continues to care for country. The focus of today's session is cross-curricular opportunities for integrated active citizenship in the middle years. And in the room, in terms of the participants we've got here, it's a nice cozy number. Okay, it's a small number. So hopefully this is much a conversation with a degree of informality. I have planned in, which I'll explain a little bit in a minute, 3 formal pause points, but there's likely to be a bit of time at the end as well, I think. So this is a workshop rather than a lecture, and at the pause points there'll be good, a good 10 minutes to kind of explore the issues that are being raised, I'd hope. I think there are strong philosophical and practical reasons for teaching aspects of civics and citizenship education across the full suite of school subjects. The broad aims of education encapsulated in the Alice Springs Declaration include educating young people for informed and active citizenship. And accordingly, there's a case that all school learning areas, in making their case for 21st century relevance, need to work together to help students to develop the knowledge, skills and values to be informed, responsible, caring, critical and active citizens locally, nationally and globally. Having articulated that generalization, and you'll have heard statements like that a lot. My professional life as a teacher, advisor and teacher educator in both England and Australia has been in a world where cross-curricular approaches in general and cross-curricular strategies in relation to the teaching of citizenship education in particular have failed to achieve meaningful impact in schools, and secondary schools especially. In 2009, I edited this 8-book series of citizenship through texts for 11 to 16-year-olds in England. Most of the units across the series foregrounded issues which aim to spark young people's interest and develop their political literacy. They were good. There was lots and lots of good stuff in these texts. The reviews were positive, but sales were derisory. I reckon the publisher made a loss on them. Arguably, they pitched to a market that didn't exist and a curricular black hole. Evidence from school inspectors in England, where I worked with teachers and pre-service teachers before 2011, was fairly brutal about cross-curricular citizenship. Their judgment is seen in words in these quotations such as uneasy and often an unsuccessful compromise, a problem, peripheral, misconceived. It can be challenging to bring learning together under a single umbrella. And even if you know in our heart of hearts that exploration of complex social issues is best undertaken in cross-disciplinary and non-siloed ways, there have been comparably brutal assessments of the impact that the cross-curricular priorities have been able to achieve in being integrated into the curriculum here in Australia. And international evidence further supports the view that cross-curricular approaches to citizenship education are generally ineffective and can contribute to making students' knowledge of the subject matter pretty vague. The promise of the title of this workshop is a bit more optimistic than this. As a teacher educator, my optimism as to the engaging classroom opportunities of integrated HASS education and the worthwhile and mutually beneficial linkages that can be made between citizenship education and other curriculum areas, particularly in primary schools, remains relatively undaunted. And I've enthusiastically disseminated ideas for cross-curricular classroom and extra classroom practice through my teaching, creation of student learning resources, and academic writing. So there remains a place for cross-curricular citizenship education in schools and teachers' repertoire of pedagogical approaches. But for these to be successful, a number of specific enablers need to be in place for this practice to be effective. And we'll come to those enablers a bit later. Nevertheless, I've recently drafted an academic paper identifying 20 reasons why cross-curricular citizenship education might struggle to take flight in secondary schools. And I organised these under 4 categories of barriers: structural, epistemological, attitudinal, and pedagogical. And it suggested that these barriers sustain across most nations. I did an international literature review. Although the challenges of implementing citizenship education are always situationally and culturally contingent. And in this presentation, I want to fully acknowledge the challenges of cross-curricular citizenship before we come to some possible solutions and some examples of practice. This is a workshop, not a lecture, so I'm going to flag the 3 discussion pause points in this session now. And I'll just give you a bit of time to be reading those when it will be over to you for some sharing and some responses, where with the chair's assistance, I'll respond to both any chat interjections, comments, questions, and the usual hands up protocols. To give you more thinking time in advance, I'm flagging them now to give you some reflection time. But effectively, these 3 questions are related to the sort of tripartite organisation of this presentation. So there's a section where we can talk about the obstacles. There's a section where we can talk about enablers. And there's a section where, having shared some possible examples of units, we can talk about opportunities and possibilities. Does that sound okay as an approach to be going with? Yeah, we got some thumbs up. You're okay, Keith. You're okay, Jen. Very good. We'll keep going. So the horrendous top 20. All right, this is the top 20 you don't want to see. So and structural obstacles first. Cross-curricular content areas, or areas with content requiring an integrated approach, are generally low status in schools. And we've heard already from Joel Westheimer this morning, a primacy of political and media focus upon achievement in, and indeed policy focus, upon English and maths and STEM initiatives. Cross-curricular approaches are also hard to implement in schools. They require organisation, coordinated planning and approaches to assessment, and a shared sense of purpose and vision. The difficulties in incorporating transdisciplinary approaches to STEM, education for sustainability, or even high status literacy across the curriculum projects bear testimony to this. There can often be theory-practice disjuncture. And thirdly, citizenship education is seeking curriculum space against the backdrop of an established collection of strongly classified and strongly framed subjects and a crowded curriculum. One school principal in England was quoted as saying, "You've got to think of the curriculum as a shelf full of books. If you cram another one in, something will fall off the end." And some schools think they're doing citizenship education already. Only minimal changes required in response to curriculum imperatives. Curriculum audits can seek to map appropriate curriculum coverage, but they also sometimes indicate that elements of citizenship education are covered when they're not. Schools that are proud of their participatory whole school ethos, who have structured tutorial and assembly programs, may feel that in their context, citizenship is something primarily caught, not taught. When engaging with the politics of educational change, it can help when arguing for a new learning area to be accepted if it's regarded as something that can be practically implemented with little additional work. However, this perspective sometimes means the citizenship education teaching expectations are underestimated. And then fifthly, schools prefer curriculum change to be as minimally disruptive as possible and thus implement the apparently simplest fix. In Australia, this might mean the minimalist take-up of, and sometimes it's worse than this, but anyway, it might mean the minimalist take-up of one citizenship education unit a year, leave it into a HAS program. Pragmatism can supplant vision. And then you'll come to the epistemological challenges. Citizenship education is epistemologically complex. There's no shortage of foundational concepts that teachers might find difficult or misconstrue, particularly in the absence of any professional training, including the aims of citizenship education as a curriculum subject, the realization of educating for democracy, concerns about teaching political or contested content matter, and the nature of student experiences of active citizenship. There can be conceptual confusion about the nature and rationale behind what citizenship education is seeking to achieve. I wonder how many teachers have actually read the Australian Curriculum Civics and Citizenship Shaping document. We heard some of this debate this morning. I think it's almost the Joel Westheimer vision versus the Andrew Peterson vision. Both excellent people. So they're educators who see citizenship education as closely aligned to character education. Some academics see citizenship education as being primarily in the business of nurturing good citizens, socially responsible, moral, kind, altruistic, and resilient. More politically literacy-focused advocates of citizenship education, like me, and I suspect Keith as well, support these dispositions too, but place greater emphasis upon the qualities of effective, informed, and advocacy citizenship. Arguably, the character education vision denudes citizenship education of its political and public issues content. In the character education context, active citizenship can become benign volunteering, work experience, service, or good works, as opposed to more social justice-oriented community involvement. There's a significant difference between a form of citizenship education that simply encourages decency and good behaviour, and one that's rooted in political awareness and a commitment to social justice and equal opportunity. But understandably, it would be fair if many principals and teachers wouldn't get that distinction. There can be a coincidence of content misconceptions. For example, just because students are studying federation and government in a Year 6 history lesson or reading Animal Farm in a Year 8 English class doesn't mean that they're meeting the expectations of citizenship education in relation to understanding contemporary governmental and political structures, although of course rich links could be made in the teaching of those subjects. There's a suspicion of politics and a caution around controversial issues. Schools and teachers sometimes fail to grasp, or actively don't want to grasp, that effective citizenship education involves political learning and the development of students' political literacy. And the competition between politicised and depoliticised versions of citizenship education is a common one around the world. Plenty of schools and teachers are happy to take refuge in a depoliticised version of citizenship education, which avoids politically contested subject matter. Then there can be the uncertainty around the nature of active citizenship, which has associated complications for cross-curricular citizenship. Good citizenship education tends to have a participative so what twist. However, it would usually be something new for disciplinary areas such as history, geography, English, HPE, or science to introduce active citizenship approaches to their existing curricula. And then there can be uncertainty about what constitutes desirable pedagogical content knowledge for citizenship education teachers. And epistemological uncertainty can have flow-on effects. So back to Ofsted in England, they concluded that weaknesses in lessons observed usually derive from teachers' poor subject knowledge. This manifests itself in, for example, a lack of clarity about objectives for citizenship, a dependence on worksheets or other purchased resources, a failure to engage with controversial issues that lie at the heart of citizenship, and little overt activity in campaigning, participation, or change. And these same weaknesses can manifest in the Australian context. And then there's the attitudinal obstacles. Some schools see it as less of a priority than other core business. Teachers can be wary, change weary, and often justifiably skeptical about new curricular initiatives. Teacher buy-in is crucial, and for some teachers, citizenship education might feel like something imposed upon them, rather than an area where they have some agency. Perhaps a cross-curricular citizenship education thematic approach serves to further oppress already overburdened teachers. There can be a lack of identity and ownership, and a feeling that citizenship education is someone else's responsibility. Few individual teachers in secondary schools feel any sense of accountability for the teaching or success of citizenship education, and where curriculum content is potentially everywhere, it can end up being nowhere. Moreover, citizenship education can be seen as a competitor to more established subject areas. On occasions, new curriculum expectations are actively resisted or ignored by teachers as potentially diluting the academic content of their own subject area. A related rejection strategy by established subject areas is to reference citizenship education superficially in auditing exercises to effectively justify business as usual approaches. HAS teachers have plenty to adapt to with their own regularly revised curricula and are fighting a rearguard battle to protect the increasingly threatened curriculum time allocated to history and geography. And in this context, citizenship education can be seen by some teachers as more of a threat than an opportunity. And maybe the student negativity, although not from the students we've heard from at this conference. They've been absolutely brilliant. But young people have a well-developed nose for the phony or the half-hearted. Where schools are not taking citizenship education seriously, students are likely to pick up on this. Hazily articulated citizenship education or civics, knowledge-heavy approaches to the structure of law and politics taught by skeptical or uncertain teachers can confirm a view among young people that citizenship education is of little of importance and dry and boring. So citizenship education has to contend with the negative or skeptical attitudes of some key stakeholders. And for a learning area that lauds student voice, citizenship education launched into a school context where teacher voice can be muted and student voice more honoured in theory than practice. Moreover, inquiry learning, partnership with external organisations, building in opportunities for open-ended participatory problem solving or action-oriented student-led projects are all pedagogically demanding and hard work to organise. Which brings us finally to the pedagogical challenges. Teaching and learning citizenship education via cross-curricular approaches can be complex pedagogically. There are planning challenges in integrating approaches to teaching and learning across different subject domains. Planning for cross-curricularity involves juggling many variables. It can variously encompass planning for the integration of subject content or conceptual themes, learning processes, skills, competencies, or experiences, and the balancing of learning objectives and assessment priorities. And there's a delicate balance across these dimensions, even when only one learning area is concerned. The demands of an additional learning area can disrupt, distort, or dilute host subject learning imperatives, and thereby unsettle established professional teaching practices. There are actually some specific challenges for history teachers. Undoubtedly, history can be an excellent partner for citizenship in terms of supplying examples from the past that provide a context for students' understanding of citizenship issues in the present. Examples would include the study of slavery, colonial oppression, or the Holocaust, where it's natural to explore the nature of governmental power and racism in the past, and then to make connections to human rights and social justice issues, such as the Black Lives Matter movement in the present. But history teachers usually make these links implicitly or in passing to throw contemporary light upon the past. Not all history teachers would accept the central premise that history's place in the curriculum must be justified in terms of its contribution to democratic citizenship. There are valid philosophical concerns about presentist perspectives, bending history education out of shape. History and citizenship education have been described by one expert as, quotes, uncomfortable bedfellows. And then a common misconception is to disaggregate the skills of inquiry and communication, which certainly a component of citizenship education, from knowledge content matter and active engagement with public issues. So after conducting a curriculum audit against the strands of what's in the Australian curriculum for citizenship education, some schools and teachers might have felt they were developing debating skills in English, practicing research skills essential for informed citizenship in history, creating opportunities for empathetic engagement in HPE classes, and analysing source of information in geography classes. Therefore, they might think, well, those key citizenship education skills are well covered. However, knowledge, skills, and participation need to be seen as three legs of a civics and citizenship education stool. That explains the picture of the stool. You might be wondering what was going on there. Teachers need to pedagogically join up these three elements of knowledge, skills, and action in their teaching approaches. Without one of these components, the stool falls over. I've gone a bit early. We'll go back one. Citizenship can struggle for definition and presence in a broader social studies or looser thematic curriculum framework. Commonly in countries where integrated social studies is the preferred curriculum model for teaching HASS curriculum content, and this includes Australia, citizenship education can lose out in terms of the time devoted to it compared to the more established disciplines of history or geography. And then last, but certainly not least, assessing learning areas taught via cross-curricular methods is complicated. Finding ways to assess citizenship education has been a particular and significant challenge for those charged with teaching citizenship. And there are many reasons for this. The challenges are extended when citizenship education is taught and assessed in cross-curricular contexts. So coordination, record keeping, the narrative of student experience of citizenship education by young people all need to be well organised. And of course, all those various structural, epistemological, attitudinal and pedagogical obstacles interact and overlap with one another. So I acknowledge that I've started gloomy. I promise that things are going to look up in parts 2 and 3. But at pause point 1 and in the room, to what extent do you recognise the structural, epistemological, attitudinal and pedagogical barriers to high quality cross-curricular citizenship as being obstacles? Has that been your experience? Jen, you're a head of department. Has that been your experience? Keith, experienced teacher. Have you are those 20 obstacles real ones for you in your context?
Absolutely. I think in particular the structural obstacles, like people just not seeing it as, or not seeing citizenship education as something that should be prioritised. Like I think the history and like within the HAS framework, like I think the history and geography teachers have really strong subject associations, so that it sort of tends to take primacy. And then there are teachers as well who either don't see it as a priority or feel uncomfortable having political conversations with students because they don't feel like they can do it in a way. They don't feel like they can do it in a way that is depoliticized, because they feel like they have to depoliticize it when it's a much more rich conversation when you don't.
Have I been over miserable there, or painting too horrible a picture of the challenges of cross-curricular citizenship?
I think you've been incredibly thorough, Peter. I was trying to think of something you've missed, but I couldn't. Yeah, and there's some that I hadn't even thought of before, especially the relationship between history teachers and civics and citizenship, and how you said they can be uneasy bedfellows. And I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense considering some of the conversations I had, 10, 15 years ago with history teachers about civics and citizenship education. I mean, you also mentioned teachers' pedagogical content knowledge. But I think even before that, there's just the content knowledge. Let's not call it content knowledge. Let's just call it general knowledge. Is so poor. And I'm not having a go at teachers. I see it in my initial teacher education students at the moment. They're not particularly interested in a lot of these things, with the exception of a couple. But they also just don't know it. And it's that kind of terrible cycle that you're talking about in one of the points about how it just if they're not excited about it, if they're not confident about it, well, they're never going to convince students to be excited about it, are they? Yeah. So yeah, I think you've been very thorough. I recognise almost all of them.
How about you, Anita? Did you recognise what was going on there? You're on mute.
Yeah, I had to find my mute button. I was looking for it. Look, to be completely honest with you, I'm not a civics teacher. In fact, I've never been a teacher, but I worked for a very, very long time at Questacon, and we worked a lot on cross-curricular STEM education, and the issues are very similar there. Certainly, we found, I think it was in your first one, it was, the teachers felt like they didn't have the knowledge, or they felt like they didn't have the time to put the effort into it. But, I see huge value in it. But, I don't have a lot to contribute from a teacher perspective, but I see why there would be a lot of barriers.
Julie's probably an expert to talk to about the connections between geography education and citizenship education. Did you recognise some of those challenges, Julie?
Oh, yes, I did, very much. And a bit like Keith, I couldn't think of anything else that you'd missed out on. And I think geography teachers can be incredibly focused on geography, and geography is only taught by a specialised geography teacher. And, if you kind of bring citizenship in there, that will dilute the geography curriculum, and it'll be a bit of extra work and so on and so forth. But your presentation made me think of an assessment task I set for pre-service teachers, which was to focus on a local area issue and then unpack that in terms of a unit of work across history, geography, civics, and economics. And even though the students found that quite difficult, at the end they realised the value of it. So I think persistence in the area whereby they had to actually move away from perhaps their specialism around history or geography or economics and look at something from a bit more of a holistic point of view that's focused on a local issue, and express that as a unit of work. At the end of it, they found it quite a useful exercise to be engaged in.
Look, and I'm not saying this later on, so you've reminded me, Julie, but in terms of a more positive observation, but sometimes the curriculum enables that really well. So the Year 3 primary curriculum has a really strong focus upon community across history, geography and citizenship education. Arguably, you could say the same for the Year 4 curriculum about sustainability education and sustainability in geography, in citizenship, and through the cross-curricular priority. So sometimes the curriculum isn't the evil villain of the piece. You can do interesting things with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna keep going. Tace, I'll come to you first when we do our next pause point. I think this is a shorter section, this middle section, and then the last section I'm going to share 4 possible units of work across 4 different year groups, which possible suggestions for kind of integrated citizenship education. Of course, I don't think it is quite as miserable as I've painted, although I think that all of those 20 points are realistic points. School and curriculum constraint structures are important factors in the implementation of citizenship education. And the identified structural barriers indicate reasons why many schools struggle both strategically and organisationally to cope with the introduction of citizenship education. But it is time to get more positive. The epistemological barriers are real, but resolvable for school leaders and teachers with the will to think deeply about how citizenship education can be something worthwhile and transformative for students in their specific contexts, and as Julie says, localities. Attitudinal negativity often tends to dissipate when school leaders, classroom teachers and students see or experience effective examples of citizenship education in action that they can identify with. More developed, active and experiential pedagogical approaches to citizenship education tend to emerge with greater subject knowledge, confidence and experience. I'm sure you've seen that, Keith, in your experience of kind of justice citizens, that doing is believing and seeing is believing, and teachers may not have done much of this stuff before, but in doing it, develop the confidence to do more of it. Yeah. And in this way, cross-curricular citizenship education can augment and enrich a core program of discrete citizenship when organised through identifiable carrier subjects and designated units of study. Cross-curricular citizenship education approaches may struggle to act as the primary organisational mechanism for schools implementing citizenship education effectively, but they can work well as a complement to a core discrete citizenship education programme and serve as an extra layer to the curriculum, in spite of the identified structural, epistemological, attitudinal and pedagogical barriers. So I've shared a model possible diagram of a core and carrier subject model that might work for a secondary school. This assumes a civics and citizenship core.
Well, I think we've just lost Peter.
We have.
I teach a lot in the Indigenous studies subjects in ITE, and we have very similar barriers in terms of whether people say, oh, it should be integrated, Indigenous perspectives, culture and history should be integrated into every subject, or is it its own standalone subject, or both? So it's kind of, it mirrors a lot of the barriers that you just presented, the discussions we have in our school.
Thanks for that. Can you see the screen sharing now? Is that back?
Yep.
So I was talking about this diagram, wasn't I? And the shared model. with the discrete citizenship at the centre, and then opportunities for extension through history, geography, English, HASS, science, ICT, and other curriculum areas. And my intention in sharing this with you is that it might serve as a prompt for curriculum reflection and planning. For example, it might be that using that model as a kind of frame for professional learning. So share the exemplar core and carrier subject diagram and mapping, if possible, civics and citizenship content and conceptual understanding with your teaching team, and then think about how far it resonates in your working context, how you might develop an articulation of students' citizenship learning experiences in your school, drawing upon this model. What I'm not doing is saying that it's easy. Change management and curriculum development transformation can be challenging, but this might be a purposeful place to start. In terms of possible enablers, and I said this second session was about enablers, the enablers would include a commitment to the principles of citizenship education, a preparedness to work across subject boundaries with colleagues, a shared vision for how students' curricular experience of citizenship education fits together with curriculum links being integral, natural and unforced. At least one teacher with specific expertise in relation to the citizenship issue being investigated, or involvement of an outside expert as facilitator. Committed leadership support in terms of valuing the place of citizenship education within both the whole school culture and the curriculum, and financial support for out of school learning where appropriate. I think the enablers would go on: a committed local community and opportunities for place-based learning, the identification of some key citizenship education issues or problems that interest both students and teachers, a preparedness on behalf of teachers, students and the community participants to confront their own values and the values held by others, school and parental agreement that citizenship education and social justice issues are at the centre of the curriculum, even if this means getting political, and a commitment to the acquisition of citizenship education skills and a willingness to help students to take action to engage with citizenship education challenges identified. However, what I would say is that the length of this list of enablers and the degree of difficulty in putting some of them in place demonstrates that doing citizenship education well is demanding. Civics and citizenship education comparative curriculum marginality, and in many states and schools low visibility, may at least in part be explained by the scale of the challenge faced by schools and teachers who want to do it well. Which is where we come to my second pause point, an opportunity to listen to you and take breath after running from one room to another to sort out that interruption. But what are the enablers of good practice in relation to cross-curricular citizenship education? And are there some examples of practice and other kinds of enablers that you'd like to share?
I think,
No, you go, Jen. Julie, please.
I think one of the enablers is to shift out of your particular subject area. So if you're a history teacher or geography or economics, for example, to see that there's good teaching that can occur outside of that through the civics and citizenship subject area. So, you know, often, as we said earlier, geography teachers or history teachers just don't want to teach history and not kind of move beyond looking at the possibilities of a cross-curricular and working with something like civics and citizenship. A bit like you were saying earlier, Tace, in terms of just that kind of working together and working in a collaborative space, maybe rather than a singular space of teaching.
Should we share what four potential examples might look like? I'll share, then see what you think, and then we can round up our thoughts at the end. So my four examples are citizenship activities and tasks dropped respectively into a Year 5 HPE unit, a Year 6 HASS unit, and Year 7 and 8 English units. There are useful common elements that can be applied to all civics and citizenship incursions into other subject areas, which I think are worthy of inclusion if citizenship education is going to be a substantial component of an integrated unit. I particularly like this Get Global model from the UK with 6 steps to kind of put into the HBE, the English, the HAS context. The 6 steps being promoting curiosity, engagement, some research, finding out more, planning, some action, and then reflection. And there are various versions of this active citizenship model, and have a look at Keith's book for some other ideas, but I like the structure provided here. I also find it helpful in undertaking curriculum planning to think in terms of curricular key questions. My key questions across the 4 units would be, how do our eating choices affect our health and the planet? How's the food and what we eat a public issue? Is the world a global village? And what's Australia's place in the village? How's the personal political? Values, voice, identity and action. What might I do about an equality issue that I care about? How do values inform my thinking about social and political issues? And then why should young people care about the dark arts of persuasion, spin and propaganda, and some advocacy for human rights? How Australian curriculum content descriptors are clustered makes a big difference to their balance, orientation and feel. I'm going to move quite quickly over these linkages and move to more unit substance and ideas on resources and activities, but note the synergies between descriptors, the inclusion of both knowledge and skills content descriptors, and the richness that different elements of the general capabilities and cross-curricular priorities can bring to units. So I've actually got the fewest slides on this first example of how do our eating choices affect our health and the planet? How is food and what we eat a public issue? So a putative Year 5 unit might explore questions such as, how healthy are Australian young people's diets? How healthy is our school? What might be done to achieve healthier lifestyles through food? How does the food that I eat connect me with places around the world? Is local food always the best choice? To what extent do we have a moral responsibility to protect the rights of those involved in the supply of our food? Can we make more ethical food choices if we think about food miles and our carbon footprint? How might the outcomes of the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow impact on the future food that people eat? The production of meat generates more carbon than vegetables because of the amount of feed needed by animals, and methane from cows adds to greenhouse gases. Does this mean that government should be promoting vegetarianism? And the active citizenship finale of a unit like this could involve an ethical Ready Steady Cook or MasterChef style event with tastings and student presentations to parental and community audiences sharing their learnings from the unit. So that's my Year 5 suggestion. Here's the Year 6 suggestion around the world as a global village, and here's an example again where the curriculum helps with joined upness. A prerequisite of effective cross-curricular citizenship is a preparedness to demonstrate some creativity and agency around how different curricular content descriptors, including the different learning areas, general capabilities and cross-curricular priorities, are clustered together. And the Year 6 HAS curriculum already encourages a joined upness between geography, history and citizenship. It's important for students to understand how, as individuals and consumers, they're global citizens and be able to understand how interdependent the Australian economy and society has become. How powerful are the so-called FANG global brands of Facebook, Amazon, Netflix and Google? I like this broaden your horizons exercise where students take issues in turn and think about how it affects people in other parts of the Asia Pacific region and the world. Does the issue affect people in similar or different ways? And then how can you find out more? A route finder resource provides a structure to dig into a global issue in some more depth. Students can undertake some form of how global are you exercise and a version of the world as a global village resource. The children can explore in a historical context the ways in which the world has come to Australia in the past 150 years in terms of the impact of migration. They can also think about how and why it benefits Australia to be involved in world affairs. They can do a think about how you'd like the world to be in 20 years' time activity. What will exist in the world that doesn't exist now? Think about who has the most power to change things. Who could you influence to change things? Arguably, Greta Thunberg's global climate action protest movement has had some intergenerational impact. In all of this work, it's important to nurture an understanding of the reality of the lives of others and avoid the kind of thinking behind the stereotypes of the developing and developed world, although sometimes cartoonists can deploy stereotypes for campaigning or rhetorical purposes. And it's best this might involve direct student-to-student contact via a school linking to a partner school in an Asia-Pacific region. A nice active citizenship and collective outcome from this work might be come out of if the world became a better place for children task, with a whole class collage generated in terms of what it might look like for proud sharing in the school entrance foyer. Whilst not sugarcoating the realities that the global village is facing some potentially catastrophic effects from global warming, it can help to give Year 6 students some sense of hope and optimism that there are answers and possible responses that they can be contributing to. And then what about a Year 7 unit? How's the personal, political, values, voice, identity, action, potentially linking to the general capability of personal and social capability and ethical understanding? Students can think about how they can make their voices heard in relation to equalities issues that they care about. They might come to recognise a mantra and how it's used to motivate individuals to action. They can then move on to recognise a manifesto, understanding how it's used and by whom. They can build the confidence to argue for an individual viewpoint, develop appropriate means of self-expression, and challenge the opinions of others appropriately. They can take part in a range of moral dilemma scenarios, and continue and vote with your feet exercises can be deployed, which relate to the citizenship curriculum statement, how values including freedom, respect, inclusion, civility, responsibility, compassion, equality and a fair go can promote cohesion within Australian society. They can think about whether Australia has achieved equality around race, gender and disability, about what happens when rights conflict. What lessons are there from the COVID-19 epidemic in relation to responsibility and freedom? How do political parties promote different ideas around fairness and equality? In relation to getting their voice heard, there are all sorts of things that young people might want to change to achieve a fairer go locally or nationally. One activity might relate to identifying different ways to make their voice heard in relation to a particular issue. The active citizenship endpoint of the unit might be to agree and create a citizenship manifesto, which they can pitch to improve their local area to a mix of invited local politicians. And then we've got potentially a Year 8, also English unit, persuasion, propaganda and advocacy. They can look at the role of governments and persuasion and think about the art of spin. The students are likely to have heard about the phenomenon of fake news and may associate it with Donald Trump, but it's important to explore what it actually is and why it might be so dangerous. For example, contributing to the attack on US Congress in January 2021. Students can unpack the techniques and tactics of persuasion and debating. They can focus upon emotive language that might secure cut-through. A tactics grid can help to explain how messages can be tailored for different audiences. The students might conduct a Gruen-style exercise whereby they imagine that they're part of an advertising company bidding to receive a contract from the Australian Electoral Commission. How would they create a persuasive campaign targeted at 18 to 24-year-olds about the importance of enrolling to vote and the power of voting? They can critique these posters and try to do a better job. They may actually go on to choose a human rights issue that concerns them and plan to take some action on the issue. This could be developed into a real-life active citizenship project where students carry out their action and reflect on their success. I recommend the Amnesty film Over to You, which shows a London-based Amnesty youth group from a school taking protest action for a human rights campaign to free a political prisoner locked up in China for sending an email via Yahoo. The students can critique campaign literature and websites of organisations such as Amnesty, World Vision, Greenpeace, the Bob Brown Foundation and CAFOD. And from the range of ideas suggested here, and I really like this, this piece on ideas for taking action, I'd definitely use this as a class resource. Which do they think would be most persuasive in helping them to achieve their goals? Have a balloon debate to help the class decide their own focus campaign, and think about what English skills are fine-tuned and important in this process. I genuinely believe that both English teachers and the English curriculum are underutilised resources for nesting the exploration of civics and citizenship topics. There's a greater preponderance of curriculum space here, and in terms of improving students' reading comprehension, speaking and writing, there's flexibility around the kinds of texts and themes to be explored, which may as well have an engaging citizenship orientation. Moreover, English teachers are likely to be more comfortable in the space of managing students' oral debates and arguments around sensitive or contested contemporary issues. So what might be the takeaways? And I think we're pleased that even with that break in the session, we should have kind of 10 minutes left at the end for a bit of talk and reflection on cross-curricular citizenship. But I'd recommend taking away as a professional focus an activity something like this. Choose an existing unit of work from history, geography, English, HB or science, and consider how it might be adapted to give it a civics and citizenship orientation. Identify the citizenship learning objectives and other relevant general capability learnings, drawing upon the Australian curriculum content descriptors, and then decide how you could make it clear to the students that they're doing citizenship. I feel as I've been a bit breathless there as we had that break, and I apologise for that. But nice opportunity to calm down and listen to you now in terms of you had the three-part presentation. We've heard about the obstacles, we've heard about the enablers, and I've shared with you tentatively some possible examples of integrated units, which for me do justice both to the host subject area and to the citizenship learning and the kind of citizenship curriculum. But what are your reflections on the 4 examples that I've shared? And has this session prompted some thoughts on possible curricular innovation in your own working context?
I think I'm going to suggest the Year 8 unit on spin at school. I think that's a great idea.
I'm happy to share associated resources, Jen.
Yeah, that'd be great. It'll give you huge brownie points with the head of English.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're looking at more social and emotional learning skills and that sort of thing. So I think, which I think tie in really nicely with civics and citizenship as well. And you touched on some of it, like I think you referenced a few of those in the personal and social capability in that as well. And
it's not, the thing is, Jen, with English, I don't think it's a stretch in kind of curricular or content terms. English teachers will be doing media analysis. They will have units on this, but they could just inject a more political dimensions. They'll certainly, in year 7 and 9, pre-NAPLAN, rather boringly, be spending a lot of time reminding the kids about how they do persuasive writing. But let's make that persuasive writing real and authentic and engaging.
Can I add something? Hi, I'm a teacher in Canberra. One of the ways that we did it in English as well is linked it in with the What Matters writing competition run by the Whitlam Institute. Because of course you can start it off by having those discussions about what matters, you know, that are linked to civics and citizenship issues. And then of course you get the students to be doing a persuasive piece of writing to enter the competition. So it does have that real aspect to it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, Peter, you've given, oh, am I on mute? No. You've given a really comprehensive kind of exploration of each of those 4 areas and, you know, kind of shown, I think, how starting from a particular subject area, you can just build that civics and citizenship into it. So, you know, some great ideas there across those 4 areas.
Thanks, Julie.
4 units of work, yep.
I'm just thinking about how I can take those examples and those ideas that you've presented, Peter, and use it in my initial teacher education program. Because
one thing you might do, Keith, is, I mean, for example, I was prompted on the HPE one. I've just written a paper with my HPE initial teacher education colleagues.
Yeah.
So if you like, the links between HPE and citizenship were fresh in my mind, having done that work with them. And maybe a part of our role is just to, because I've got fantastic HPE colleagues, but I don't think they had sufficiently appreciated the synergies with civics and citizenship, that once they're pointed out to them and they think about the work they're doing with the students and the important topic matter that they're dealing with, they think, yeah, actually this is for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a task, but it's kind of like a studio more than a traditional tutor lecture kind of thing, where I encourage them to think about the cross-curriculum capabilities. And because civics and citizenship's my thing, I make them think about that as well, and how they can incorporate that in a history or a geography unit. But I really struggle to provide them with a framework and a discussion of the challenges, and then some very clear examples, and that's what you've
I mean, for examples, and like you're so quick off the mark, Keith, you could probably find it on ResearchGate, but also on a past issue of The Social Educator. I think it was following the last Ballarat conference. I presented explicitly on citizenship and history, and with lots of examples of good primary history that combined the two, that made it both good history and good citizenship. But I don't resile from the challenges of combining citizenship and history. They're very real. But I think it's worth, I like to leap to using the curriculum as an enabler, and actually then thinking about, let's not just problematize, as I did in the first third of this presentation. And that problematization wasn't, putting up a straw person. That they're real issues. But I think it's best to look for, I think when working with teachers, and my professional learning work with teachers, which I've done much more in England than in Australia, teachers want to see examples of practice in action, and they want to believe that this is something they can do in their contexts.
Exactly. The other thing, and this is just a reflection on the presentation as a whole, because it's stimulated lots of thoughts, which is always a sign of a good presentation. But for other reasons, I've been doing some discussions and interviews with academics about transdisciplinary research, right? And one of the things they always talk about is that it's not the bashing together of subjects or discipline areas that's the hard part. It's the kind of people issues that arise as a result of that. That's the difficult part. And there's lots of advice about, if you're working as part of a team, and you need to be humble, you need to be flexible, you need to be a little bit nomadic. And I was wondering, is that what we as, especially in secondary schools, we often come with a KLA or a couple of KLA's expertise. Do we need to be humble and flexible when we're considering our place within the curriculum and our place within young people's education? I don't know.
I think the examples make it seem just infinitely doable. And you've done a really good job of going from problematizing it to say, well, actually there are easy solutions, and it's this simple.
Yep, I agree.
But I don't think 2 minutes back to Keith's getting beyond your two areas of expertise. I think it's worth teachers being humble that there's good stuff in other parts of the curriculum that they may be less conscious of. There's certainly good stuff, fantastic stuff in the general capabilities. I mean, how many of our colleagues know that there's a whole section of the personal and social capability, general capability, called contribution to civil society? And validating some work that you can do in that area.
Okay. Well, I think, Peter, you've given us lots of really good food for thought. Well done.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, thank you to the kind of small group of participants, and I hope that folk who are accessing this via recording later find it helpful, illuminating, and my email was at the start of this presentation, and if you're looking for any kind of follow-up resources or indeed further dialogue about the challenges and opportunities for cross-curricular citizenship, then by all means get in touch.
Generous as always.
Good stuff. Thanks, team.
Thank you.